I found very strange. I'm not sure what was causing that. There we are live. I'll stop talking about that then. So, okay.
All right. So welcome to Pizza with the Pastors. We're sorry for a little bit of a late start today. We were having some technical difficulties, which is ironic because our online pastor, Pastor Kurt Bissell, is with us. And so now we all look terrible in his eyes. So it's the shame before the online pastor.
That makes me look the worst because I'm probably the reason it didn't work. So,
nah.
But Terry McHugh fixed it. So just on the record, that's how it got fixed.
So if you're watching, which we hope you are, so what Pizza with the Pastors is we started it, gosh, I don't know, maybe even 6 or 7 years ago as a way for us to connect with newer people at Garfield Memorial Church. And when we're in the buildings, we actually gather in our physical locations and give people pizza. So there's truth in advertising. But we decided to go online because we have been bringing everything else online and we haven't missed a beat as a church. So we thought if there's anybody out there that's newer to Garfield, you maybe come to us since we've gone completely online, or maybe you've been worshiping with us prior to that. But we really want to let you get to know more about the church and share about the DNA and a little bit maybe about us. And we'd like to know about you. Because a lot of the changes that we've made, especially to our physical locations we did a major renovation in Pepper Pike 5 years ago. And a lot of that was from feedback from people that came to Pizza with the Pastors. And they said things like, there's no place to gather. So we now have a main lobby with a cafe. They said, we don't know which door to go in. So we really revamped how our entrances are. So your feedback really makes a difference. And so we're open to questions. We're going to be pretty informal. And Pastor Steve Furr, one of our teaching pastors, is going to join us. But first, our introduction. So I'm Terry McHugh, executive pastor. That is not Chip Freed, but it is Terry Freed sitting in, and certainly hugely vital part of the ministry. So I'm glad you're here. Scott Blevins, our South Euclid campus pastor and all around elephant joke maker. And then Kurt Bissell, our online campus pastor, who's always been really important, but he's even more important now than ever. So anyhow, so we'll just be here for maybe 30 minutes or so. And if you have questions, please chime in. You can also join us in the Zoom room if you like. We'd be happy to see you and hear your comments and questions. So, but what I thought might be something interesting to talk about is, we're all in ministry, we're all serving a very unique and amazing church. Garfield Memorial Church is part of the Mosaics movement. We're committed that the church would be on earth as it is in heaven. Revelation 7:9, people of every tongue, tribe, and nation. And I see Larry's on, so hi, Larry. But I thought it'd be good to just briefly share how we ended up in ministry and maybe even how we ended up at Garfield. So I'm going to ask Pastor Scott to kick us off.
Wow, ministry is, there's a really, really long story behind all of that. I won't give the.
We don't have time for long stories.
I'll give you the brief version. I went into college planning on going to law school and then into politics, and had just a profound experience kind of out of the blue when I was in my freshman year, first semester of my freshman year, and really became convinced that God was saying, I don't want you in law, I don't want you in politics, I want you in church pastoring. And I just prayed about that, consulted with some other folks, and just became convinced of it, and changed my focus that semester. And so by second semester, I changed my direction, but kept my major the same, because my current major was a bachelor's of philosophy, which would have entitled me to go to grad school. And I still had to go to grad school anyway, so I kept the same major. I'm going to pass for a second because I'm starting to cough, and then come back after I find a cough drop. So
that sounds good. So Pastor Craig, I know you may not be able to stay the whole time, so why don't you tell us your story?
Yes. Yeah. Thanks, Terry. I'll probably jump off here in a few minutes. But yeah, so I mean, it's actually similar to Scott, and I didn't know that part of his story. I really came to a saving faith in Christ in college. Was a nominal Methodist growing up, and really found a personal relationship with Christ when I was in college. Was going to do finance. My undergrad is actually in business finance. And by my senior year, just really felt a strong call to pastoral ministry. So ended up going straight from college into seminary. And then I had been not in a Methodist church in college, but felt like the Lord called me back to the Methodist church. And so I ended up, because my membership was still United Methodist, I was able to kind of sneak in without anybody asking too many questions. So and then I had pastored full time for 8 years. Well, I guess 7 years, but I served as a lead pastor down in Brimfield, which is just south of Kent, for 5 years, and then I was in Mentor for a couple. My wife and I, we ended up leaving full-time pastoral ministry about 5 years ago, and so I work as a financial advisor now. But never gave my credentials up. Just always felt like God might want me to stay connected to the greater body, especially in the United Methodist Church. And we actually came to Garfield right after I left full-time pastoral ministry. We started attending Garfield as a family. And I like to say Garfield ruined our idea of what church was. And I mean that obviously in the most positive way. We had never been part of a multi-ethnic church and really felt like it was a glimpse of heaven in a way that I had never experienced, but knew deep in my bones that was true. And so we stayed there for about a year, and then we moved to the west side of Cleveland, and just wanted to get involved in the community we were living in. Of course, as many of you know, or you'll get to know with Pastor Chip, he's always got an ulterior motive or a God vision, one of the two. But he approached me about 2 years ago, him and Terry McHugh, and they gave me a hard sell. They said, we want you to come be our online campus pastor. And I was all prepared to say no. And then Chip reminded me of what the vision of Garfield was. And I said, okay. And so that's how I got here 2 years ago. And I just said to Pastor Terry this morning, I said, you know, with the race riots going on and just all of the divisiveness in this country right now, this is why I wanted to work at a church like Garfield, to be able to hear my brothers and sisters' pain, but also to listen and to be hopefully to be somewhat of a healing presence to people. But it's doing things to my soul and my spirit that I didn't know needed to be done. And so it's been a real privilege to serve. Am I there still? Okay. But yeah, I was just gonna say it's been a real privilege to serve at this congregation, because I feel like it's changed my life in some pretty significant ways. So before I'll stop there before I give more of an infomercial for the church, but I would not be I wouldn't be pastoring at all right now if it wasn't for Garfield. So it is a pretty significant part of my call story right now.
Well, and we wouldn't be the church we are without you. So you're a big part of what's going on. So if folks are joining in, this is Pizza with the Pastors, and with Terry Freed, who's part of our pastoral team. Anyhow, Pastor Chip's not able to be here. Pastor Kurt's going to have to jump off in a second, but we thought we'd just share how we ended up in ministry, how we ended up at Garfield, and share a little bit more generally about the church. And if people have questions, you can put it in the chat. But we want to get to know those of you who are watching, so feel free to jump in. You can jump into the Zoom room. There's a link on our Facebook page. So thanks, Kurt, for being here. I know you got to get going, but appreciate you taking the time.
Good seeing you.
Good to see you all. Thanks so much for all you're doing. I'll talk to you soon.
Enjoy the rest of your evening.
All right. Bye.
Bye. So Scott was starting and stopping to share a little bit about how he ended up in ministry, and he started to go down one road like many of us did, and then went down another. So why don't you pick up on that? And Terry, I'm going to ask you to share a little bit of your story, and anything you want to say, and I'll share a little bit of mine, and we'll talk about a couple other things and jump off. So, Scott.
Yeah. So like I was saying before my cough, I just have allergies and other such things. I'm not sick, so I'm not coughing because I'm ill. But way back in college, which is a really long time ago now, I really had that sense of God saying, I want you to be pastoring. I'd never had any sense of that before, and made that shift and really haven't looked back. I was had been pastoring for almost 20 years when Pastor Chip called me one day and said, hey, we've got this campus we're starting, and I've started over in South Euclid. I'd like to talk with you about that. I met with him and Terry, and we had a long discussion. And I left saying, it's really, really cool, but I just don't think, it's the right timing. And then, within 2 weeks, I had that similar kind of tap on the shoulder that I had when I was in college, and really had a real strong sense of God saying, no, this is where I want you to go. I took the family. We came in one Sunday and visited Garfield during worship, and I was just blown away by the multi-ethnic nature of it, and really seeing again what I'd read about in the Bible as church, that wasn't divided along lines of race or politics or ethnicity or economic status, but was just really a mixing of all sorts of folks, and just fell in love with it and was captivated by the vision and the mission of the church, and Chip and Terry's leadership in the church, and just really knew that I wanted to be a part of it, and had that real strong sense of God saying, yeah, this is where I want you to be in ministry now. And so we made the shift all the way back in 2015, which isn't really that long ago, but sometimes feels like a whole lifetime ago.
Yeah.
And so that's my story of how I got here, and just have been loving it. So
Yeah. Well, then obviously we're better because you came on board as well. So, definitely a God thing. So if you're joining us, this is Pizza with the Pastors. We're just sharing a little bit about how we ended up in ministry, how we ended up at Garfield. And if you have questions, put them in the chat and we will respond. And I'm not going to say it's Ask Us Anything, but you can ask us almost anything. I don't want to get myself in trouble. So Terry, share a little bit about, how you guys ended up in ministry, and anything you want to share about the church. And appreciate you being here. I know you don't necessarily like talking in front of people, but it's just us. So it's safe.
Yes, well, and I know, as Pastor Terry said, I can't be long. I'm usually long-winded, and I jump from one subject to another. My brain works that way. But no, I would have to say started a relationship with God when I was 18 years old. So I'm really so thankful, and I'm thankful every day that that many years ago that I could be connected with God and have had all this time to learn and be a part of what God's purpose for me is. So I'm just thankful I didn't come into a relationship with God, whether that's, everybody has to come in at their own time in life when they make that connection, but it was something traumatic that happened to me at a very young age. And, but I always grew up. I didn't grow up United Methodist. I grew up in another faith. And so my parents, both my parents was involved in that faith, very committed. And so all of the five of us were involved, but as a lot of people, not connected, worshiping and going to all the different meetings and so forth, not understanding why. And it wasn't until the traumatic situation happened in my life. And then I felt all alone. And in feeling all alone, I thought that, in this traumatic situation that, that I, should no longer be here because I was unhappy and, the loneliness of family, and rejection and that kind of thing. And so all I can say is that I didn't believe in this God that my parents had me go and be a part of his, faith every Sunday. We were all involved. I didn't believe in this God that they raised me to learn about. And so during that traumatic experience, I said, if you are God and you say you love me, and this is how I feel, then you're going to reveal yourself to me, or you're going to answer this prayer I had asked this God that I really didn't believe in. And I say shortly after that, a few days later, God answered. It wasn't what I had asked him for, but it was an answer. And because of that answer, things were revealed to me. And then I said, hey, I believe in you. It wasn't what I had asked for, but I believe in you. So ever since I was 18, but in between that time before I met my husband, we've been married for, Chip and I have been married for going on 30 years this year, but we've been together for 32. As a lot of people who try to find their way, I mean, I initially did and got involved with God and Bible reading and all that kind of stuff. And then, during that time I was young, I was in and out. But I still believed in God. I was just doing things that I knew were not pleasing God. And I kept putting God on hold about coming back fully, even though I had given my heart, but I haven't given really of myself and the things that I should be doing. And so it wasn't, and so I was not in anywhere, a place of faith, because I left my old place of where I grew up and was brought into when I was 18. I just left them. I just felt they didn't fit what, I believe how God felt about the world and about me. So, so for many years up until I met Chip, I had, not attended a place of worship. I didn't know where to go and didn't necessarily pursue it because I kept saying I wasn't ready to fully commit. I was never baptized because in the faith that I was involved in, if you became baptized and you did something that against, what they believed to be wrong, then you were shunned. And so I knew that as I continue to develop as a person and as an adult, that I didn't want to make that move. If I believed in this God and loved this God, I want to be totally committed. And I knew I wasn't ready, and I knew I would make mistakes along the way because you're growing, you're developing, you're trying to figure out who you are. So I never did get baptized. But then I started going back to church when I met my husband Chip, and we started going together because when I met him, he had been hurt by his faith as well, and neither one of us, when we met, we were not involved in a church. But then as we started to date and we started to say, hey, maybe we might have a future together, we started going back to church together. And so we've been involved in ministry for, as long as since we met each other. So I say 32 years. And so and so we joined we got married in the United Methodist Church, and then and became members. And then Chip went off to seminary. We as a family and after he finished seminary, we got our first church, and then we were really involved. So we eventually went through 3-4 churches before we ended up at Garfield. It was what it is now. If you ever, what it is now is it wasn't when we got there. And so I have to say Chip is a very good teacher. I say he's a very good leader and a visionary. And he's, that's a gift that he has, and a speaker. I mean, that was one of the reasons I fell in love with him, because I would hear him speak. And when we were dating, and I was just so impressed. So that was one of the impressive things I liked about him. But as far as, Garfield, I know God was in his life directing him and directing us as a family all along. So they He's changed Garfield with God's help. And everything we do in our ministry is we're always asking God, God, what do you want us to do? How, we're clueless. Just lead us and guide us and we'll follow. And that's what's always been, as far as our, the ministry we've been involved in together. We're a team. We've always, team in marriage, team in ministry. So Garfield is totally different than when we ended up here. And we've been at Garfield. I think this will be our 17th year, and this is the longest we've ever been at a church. So, I love my church. And I know, it sounds cliche, and a lot of people say that if they're in a church, and because my husband is a minister, but I love how God has guided us into what it is now and shown us what God wants to do with God's ministry. And we trust that, and we trust God. And God has shown us all these 32 years we've been in ministry that there is a God and that God is leading us. So as far as Garfield is concerned, is totally different than what it was, and it's very special. And the people have come along and been a part of what Garfield is. I'm sure they would share the same, but it's just so good to be with the people, kind of people who want to be a part of multi-ethnic ministry. We may not, if you come and visit us and you have maybe for the first, you will for the first time or a couple of times already and trying to figure out who we are, maybe we're not your cup of tea, but I think when you come in, you'll feel that warmth and sincerity and honesty and authenticity, which is one of our core values, that it would be hard to leave. So in saying that, I'll pass it back to her, my dear friends. I'm not saying you're not my dear friend either, Scott, but Terry knows what I mean. My dear friend, Pastor Terry.
Yeah. So if you've joined us on Facebook, we decided, since we're halfway into it or more than halfway into it, we closed the Zoom room, so it's just the three of us here in the chat. But we invite you to ask questions or anything. But Pizza of the Pastors is usually a time when we share about our core values and about our church. We thought we'd be a little different today and share our stories, how we ended up at Garfield, how we ended up in ministry. Pastor Kurt, our online pastor, was with us. He had to pop off. So anyhow, so it's my turn to share about how I ended up in ministry. And I think an interesting thing about all of our stories is that we either thought that we were going another direction or weren't intending to go into ministry, or were already on a path to, for Kurt to be in business, Scott, for you to be an attorney. Terry,
I was going to be a teacher.
Yeah. So, and all those things sort of have, God is using all those things, but, yeah. And I've shared many times that people have been around that I was away from church for a very long time and came back as an adult when I was pregnant with our oldest son. And I only went because I thought I was brought up in the church. And even though I rebelled from it, I thought we should bring up our kids in the church so they'd have something to rebel from if they needed it. I met some kids in college at University of Chicago that had no faith background, and I felt kind of bad for them because they had nothing to be mad at. I mean, that's actually how I thought of it. So, but God made himself known to me and I became a Christian. And I didn't know actually that women could be pastors. And I, never thought about pastoral ministry, but I had a friend who was in the church I came out of into ministry, and she was in seminary at the time. And that kind of opened something up for me. And I began to be mentored by someone and to begin to lead small groups. And to the point, I was so active in the church that the person who did and still does my hair one time asked me, do I get my health insurance through the church or through my husband? I was not getting a penny from the church. I was not employed by the church, but they thought that I was full-time at the church. And so I really kept offering myself to God, and God, I'll do whatever you want. And then one time we have something called annual conference. We've alluded to, we are part of the United Methodist denomination. Many people don't know that. They think we're non-denom. We're really a Church of Jesus Christ in the movement. and committed to representing the church on earth as it is in heaven, Revelation 7:9, with people of every tongue, tribe, and nation. But there's something called an annual conference where clergy and lay people gather and do lots of things. So one of the things that happens is people are ordained. The associate pastor at my church was being ordained, so that's why I was there. And at the end of the service, they gave a call, and I'd been kind of struggling. And I said, if you think you're called to ministry, come forward. And I put my hands on the chair and I held on, and I was like, heck no, I ain't going. And so then after that, I had this incredible sense of sinfulness, because I had been saying, God, I'll do whatever you want. And then when he asked me to do that, I said, but not that. And I've had a pretty wild life prior to settling down in my mid-20s, and lots of things that I regret in terms of things that I did that were not good things. But I felt the most convicted about that. And so after that, I started talking to my senior pastor at the time about what are the steps for candidacy and ministry, and ended up going to seminary. I did not want to go back to graduate school. I had 3 little kids, but God made it all possible. And I came to Garfield because I was out of seminary. I was looking for a position. You guys don't want to hear about this, but the short story is, with my ordination as an ordained deacon, I have to find my own position. Elders are appointed, like Chip and Scott and Kurt. And so I knew someone, Sally Dick, who was the pastor at Garfield Memorial Church, and she invited me to apply for a position in discipleship and formation. And so I came on, and then a year later, she was elected bishop. And this weird guy named Chip Freed came in. And so Pastor Chip was appointed to Garfield Memorial Church. We didn't know each other. Usually when a new lead pastor comes in, it's everybody goes, there's a transition. But I stayed, and it's been incredible. I mean, I can't imagine being at another church. And Terry is right when she says that it's not the same church it was when we got here. And I think I always had a heart for multi-ethnic church, but I didn't know how to name that. I mean, I talked about, being a hippie and all those other things. I think the reason I was attracted to that was because it gave me a sense of the kingdom. And I didn't know it was the kingdom, but what my heart was always longing for is something that I found in coming to God and then being here at Garfield. So that is my call story. And so anyhow, so I hope this is a way for people to get to know a little bit more about us. Scott, any questions coming through, or anything you want to share from Facebook? You're muted, Scott. Scott, you're muted.
I'm sorry. I was having mouse issues and I couldn't get my mouse to the mute button, but I'm back there now. You
Okay.
would think that this is not a complicated thing, but I continually make these kinds of issues. No questions coming up on Facebook so far, but a lot of folks just being very positive about ministry and mission and life as part of Garfield Memorial Church. Victoria Davis, commented that she was all in on her very first visit, and I asked her what made her all in, and she just said that it was she just feeling welcomed. It was so warm and felt real. I was looking for the same people. I left while visiting in California, and I ran into the same kind of people at Garfield. It's and which I love it when I hear people saying that they feel it warm and welcoming, because that runs counter to conventional wisdom about church for people that aren't part of church. Whenever surveys are done of people that don't go to church, what do they think about church? It's always cold and judgmental. And so when I hear people come in and say, my first time there, I knew it was warm, I was welcomed, and I just felt really connected. And I always love to hear those stories. Larry Stahl said on his first visit to Garfield, he was sold to, and he said Garfield is not intimidating. It's relaxed and inviting feeling, which is as Jesus intended. God invites us all with no shame or pretense, and so does Garfield. That's high praise, Larry. Thank you very much. So yeah, that welcoming stuff that people are experiencing from Garfield, and that connection, that authenticity, such a good thing to hear from people as they share their stories of their first contact.
And I think, that kind of brings in our core values. Terry mentioned them, but just, safety, authenticity, growth,
Diversity.
diversity, and forgiveness.
Just like the Lord's Prayer,
Yeah. Anyhow, so we really live by those, and those were named by people, when we asked them, what do you experience at Garfield, except for the last one, which after some, prayer and reflection, Pastor Chip really felt we needed forgiveness if we're going to be a church, if we're going to be a church at all, but a church that has people that are, see things differently and, have so many differences. So to those of you who've come in, this is Pizza with the Pastors Unplugged, I guess you could say. We've been just talking a little bit about how we ended up in ministry and at Garfield, and if there's any questions. But a question I thought might be good to talk about is there a particular Bible verse that you've been leaning on recently, or that means something to you? And I'll start. Have been going back to at the end of Matthew 11, where Jesus says, "Come to me, all you who are weary and heavy burdened." And I pulled up the Message paraphrase, and it says, "Are you tired, worn out, burned out on religion? Come to me. Get away with me, and you'll recover your life. I'll show you how to take a real rest. Walk with me and work with me. Watch how I do it. Learn the unforced rhythms of grace." I love that, the unforced rhythms of grace. "I won't lay anything heavy or ill-fitting on you. Keep company with me, and you'll learn to live freely and lightly." Those have been words, I think, I don't know whether it's surprising or not surprising, but for all of us on our staff, and I see Trina, our care minister, is here. We've actually been working more since and we have a hardworking team, but the demands have been different and greater in many ways on everybody, and everybody's really stepped up to the plate, all our team. But it can grow tiring, and the stress of so many uncertainties, and what's gone on the last week with the murder of George Floyd, and the resulting, once again confronted with the original sin of the United States, racism, a spiritual sickness, even a sickness unto death in some way, well, literally unto death. So we've been hurting and grieving with people and trying to really listen and allow for lament. But so that idea of the unforced rhythms of grace, and being able to just be with Jesus and learn from him, and become more like him as I apprentice myself. I mean, that's a calling back that I always need, that, ministry isn't just a job, and it's a life, and it's not just for ordained people, it's for everybody. And we all need those unforced rhythms of grace as we travel with Jesus. So, Pastor Scott, any Bible verses come to mind that you've been kind of ruminating on lately?
One of the verses that's been most meaningful to me my whole life is Matthew 6:33, "Seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things will be added to you." And all of those things were the references to what Jesus had just been talking about, which was, the necessities, food, shelter, and clothing. That has been coming back to me more and more as we're in this phase with the pandemic, with COVID-19, with the demonstrations and the riots that are going on across the country, that we really don't know what tomorrow is going to be like. Contemporary society, particularly, well, just about anywhere in the world right now, but particularly in the United States, has been changing at a very rapid pace for decades. But when these kind of things hit, even that rapid change, there's large amounts of continuity. But when these kinds of things hit that we've not seen before or haven't seen in a long time, we don't know what tomorrow is going to be like. We don't know what next year is going to be like. And I just, God has been reminding me, just seek him, seek his kingdom, seek his righteousness, and he'll take care of the rest. And so that's been a real significant verse for me again in this season.
Thank you. Terry Freed, any Bible verses come to mind? I know you talk to God all the time in all kinds of ways, and you're always.
And that's funny you should bring that up, because Mark 12:30 hits me. It's love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind, and with all your strength. And saying that is during this time that's been very difficult, more difficult than I expected. I'm an optimist, and it takes a lot to get to me. And I think some of the people that I've talked to in our congregation and our staff and our pastors and my husband, it's really been challenging for me. It's challenged me in a lot of different ways, because it usually has taken a lot on me for me to, I guess, be in this place right now. And so I have to go to God in order to get me through day to day. But when I ask God and I talk to God, God, that's how much I love God. God has, like I mentioned earlier, at 18, how God had saved my life. And whenever I think of any difficult time, I love God so hard that I can't ever see saying, because even then at 18, when I felt I came back to God, but even though I was in and out, I never stopped believing that there was a God. Even though I wasn't connected with church or anything, I never stopped believing there was a God. And when I think of God and the blessings I've had, and God getting me through that time in my life before I met my husband, I just love God with all of the things that was mentioned in those scriptures, all my strength and my mind and my soul. And when I think about God in that way, I know I can make it each and every day. But I always have to go to something like that to remind me who God is, my relationship with God, and how God is in my life and has stayed in my life and hasn't left me.
Scott, you had a couple of questions, I think. You answered in the thread, but Victoria asked, what was Terry, what was your favorite verse again? That was Mark.
That's Mark 12:30.
Mark 12:30, okay.
It's just like explaining it. It's just like I could take. It's like when someone says, "Oh, you're so sweet," and you're so, you're just, like you do a baby, and I grab God like that, just holding, like, wanting that hug, wanting, and then I can't let go of God. It's like if you had something in your hand and you carried around all the time, like a rock or anything that reminds you of something good. That's how God makes me feel. Like, I could just grab him and take a hold of him and squeeze him and
that's awesome.
And that's how I feel. That's how God makes me feel. But I know God has his arms around me as well, even though I feel that way about him.
I love that image. It's like, oh God, you're a squishy baby.
Yes.
I did want to jump in on the question Larry asked and just talk about that real briefly too, which was, he asked on the chat on Facebook, what's your favorite version of the Bible? I used to be one. I used to have like a version. I thought this is the best. This is the best. This is a go-to one. More and more, I'm realizing that one of the things my seminary professors told me is very true, which is there is no version. No one out there created a version of the Bible to destroy Christianity, and that every version has its strengths and every version has its weaknesses, and that if you really are serious about Bible study, then it's really good to read a number of different versions. My feeling is if you're looking for something that's really, really readable, and reads more like a story than like a textbook, then the New Living Translation or the Good News Version are both good options. If you want something that's really paraphrased, the Message is a great option. If you're looking for something that's more of a literal translation, then the NIV or the NRSV are good options. But there's not a bad translation out there. They're just different translations have different strengths and different weaknesses. And so even if you go to learn Hebrew and Greek and read them in the originals, then you still have to deal with translations because there are so many different manuscripts out there. That's going too far afield. So I did want to also say what Ivanka posted, which I think is just beautiful, that she came to the back. Her first contact with Garfield Church was that she came to the back to school blast as a vendor. And then when she broke her foot and couldn't get to a regular church, she started coming to Garfield because she, again, had just found the people so welcoming. And she mentioned our parking lot attendants, which, Fred and Keith and so many others that are out in the parking lot are just, do a great job of meeting and greeting and welcoming people.
That's awesome. And just the one thing I would say on the Bible translation, I would say it's the one you'll read.
Yeah, yeah.
So it's less important in some ways that it's accurate. I mean, of course, you want it to be accurate, but all the ones, as Pastor Scott's saying, are decent. But the one that you'll actually read is the best one for you.
That's a good answer.
I 100% agree. Try different ones. And, when we're preparing messages and researching, we'll look at multiple translations and it'll help sort of unlock. So if you're reading a particular passage, another hint is, and there are so many online, you can do a parallel Bible and see the same verse or verses in multiple translations. And then it's a way of seeing different facets of the word. So anyhow, we're going to get ready to wrap up. This has been fun for me. I don't know if that's been fun for you, but to get to hear a little bit more about our team. And I hope that's been helpful because I think the DNA of Garfield has, either come deep in or maybe come out of, in some ways, the leadership here. And Chip is an amazing visionary leader. I'm, really blessed to have been in ministry now with him and Terry for so long, and Scott, amazing. And, Steve, for one of our teaching pastors, Kurt. So we have a great team. Pastor Lori is getting ready for House of Prayer, and Scott's going to have to jump off. So I have one last question that I want us to respond to real quick. Doesn't have to be real long. And then if there's any final comments on Facebook. So what is the weirdest or most unusual job you had pre-ministry is the question.
Can I go?
Yes.
It's not weird, but I have to say, as I was trying to find my way as an adult, young adult in my 20s, and I had this list of like, okay, I want to try this, I want to try this, even though I knew there wasn't a possibility that it could happen. And I say it in these words, especially being an African-American woman, having these opportunities. And it was like God was just answering all these different things I want to try. So one of the things I wanted to, I think at the time, wanted to be working at the airport in the capacity of maybe being, I don't know what they call it now, but stewardess or something. And I remember in my early 20s, I had never been on a plane and that experience. And so I think I applied for United and they flew me to Texas. I had never done that before, but I felt so brave because God had given me all of the blessings and what God has shown me and taken care of me all that time. I wasn't afraid and I felt really confident. God had, during those times when I was struggling and then God came into my life, I became more and more confident. So I interviewed at United and I don't know why I didn't get to that stewardess job, but just the experience alone was great. So, but eventually down that road, so I didn't get that position. So eventually down the road, one of my positions, and I said, well, I've always wanted to work at the airport and I didn't know what capacities. So I was in school at the time And I ended up getting a job, a part-time job while I was in school, working in the what is it, the airport tower, control tower, at my local airport, and for the safety service department. And it was just, it was a secretarial type, receptionist type job. And I just felt so important. Every day I would come and you would take the elevator to go up to the tower. Now I wasn't, at the top of the tower in an airport, that's where the traffic controllers were. So it was in that same area because there were offices underneath the control tower, but it was the simple fact that I felt so important every day that, that was my job until, I worked there in the office until I graduated just before I met my husband. But I mean, that was like something that God answered, that I didn't know where it was going, but I had the opportunity. So I say, when I brought myself over to God, God just kept blessing me in a lot of different ways throughout my life, which helped me to continue to trust God and to believe in God. So I just say, that it's not weird or anything, but, that opportunity, which I didn't think I would get, I was really surprised. And I talk about that all the time. It was an exciting time for me.
Shall I go next? Because you've got a great one, Terry McHugh. We'll let you be the climax of the funny stories here. I had a really weird job one summer in college. And it was back in my home county down in Gallia County. It was back in the days before the internet. So well before Google Maps, those kinds of things. Our county was a very, very rural county, and we didn't have any sort of unified numbering system. Every road and decided how it was going to number houses and whether it would number houses and had really weird, really long road names. And it made it difficult for emergency responders to know exactly where they were going, exactly how to get there, that sort of thing. So years before, like 10 or 15 years before, the county had paid a company to take aerial photos of the entire county to see where all the houses are, to assign numbers to each of the houses based on a county-wide numbering system. And they hadn't done anything with them. They'd sat in the engineer's office, and they were these big, like blueprint size, I mean, like 3.5, 4 feet by 4 feet photos. And they were now 15, 20 years out of date. Some houses, new houses had been built. Some old houses were gone. And my job was to drive the back roads of Gallia County and draw in the missing houses on the aerial photos so they would have an updated list for house numbering. So I had a red pencil that I drew in new houses and X'd out houses that were gone. And I did that for an entire summer. It was the strangest job I've ever had. So wow, that's it.
How old were you, Scott?
I think that was like after my freshman year of college, or maybe after my sophomore year, somewhere around in there. I was pretty young.
So I see Elena jumped in. We're just wrapping up Pizza with the Pastors. We've been answering some questions about how we know Garfield. This last question is about what's the strangest job or most impactful job we ever had. So when I was in college, and I grew up in the New York area, and so I only came to Cleveland a little later in life, but one summer I spent the summer with my best friend in Saratoga Springs, which is like a little resort town in upstate New York. And so it was, it was a pretty small town, but her family actually had a house up there. And so I stayed with her there, and there was a little restaurant bar entertainment place, and they had an exotic dancer named Cayena. I remember her name. And so they had a show every night, and it was not, it wasn't really a strip club or anything like that, but she was an exotic dancer, and she had feathers and boas and all this kind of nonsense. So I ran the lights for her, and that was my job. And it was a pretty unprofessional, not that big of a stage. And I remember being sort of under the stage and having to be on all these wires and everything. So it was not glamorous or exciting, but yeah, for a summer, I ran the lights for an exotic dancer when I was in college. So
Thanks for
that
cleaning
was
it
my
up.
worst job. Well, it actually was pretty clean. I mean, so anyhow, I hope it's been good to hang out. It's been good. I've learned some things about our team that I didn't know. And it's my privilege, our privilege to be part of a team together, and be part of Garfield Memorial Church with all you guys. And it's never been more important to be the Church of Jesus Christ and to be the multi-ethnic, be in that movement. So I'm super grateful for that, and wouldn't want to be anywhere else, and not with any other team. So thanks guys for tuning in, and we will see you another time, and go eat some pizza.
Before we go, I
Okay.
have to say that if you ever want to get a really interesting story, ask my wife sometime what the strangest job she ever had was.
You're in trouble, Scott.
Very interesting story. And
Right,
she will
well.
be happy to tell you. And if she isn't, I'll be happy to tell you.
Okay. Well, maybe next Pizza with the Pastors, guys, stay tuned. We'll hear about Amy Blevins' strangest job. All right. Thanks everyone again. Thanks, Terry.
Love you guys.
Love everybody, and we will see
Miss
you.
you.
All right. Bye.
Bye-bye.